Hi guys, today we are looking at chapter 9, Thinking and Language. So we're going to do an overview of the chapter. We're going to talk about thinking and we're going to talk about language and thought. Okay, so when you're thinking, there are different things that are involved in that cognition, which basically means to think. It's just a bigger, fancier word for it. This is all the mental activities that are associated with our thinking, with our knowing, with our remembering, and also with our ability to communicate with others, our thoughts. So the concept is it's a mental grouping of similar objects, events, ideas, and people. Prototype, this is a mental image or best example of a category. So matching new items to prototypes and in psychology, we always, also this stems off of what we call scaffolding, building off of concepts and things that we already have acquired, knowledge that we've acquired. Category is boundaries begin to blur as movement from the prototype occurs. So it's kind of like it starts to kind of generalize over into other areas. So now this is interesting, categorizing face influence on recognition. Now, if you look at page 326 in your text, figure 9.1, categorizing faces influences recollection. Okay, and so shown a face that was 70% white. Okay, and that's your face, that is the third one in or more. People tended to classify the person as white to recollect the face as more white than it was. Recreation of the experiment was a courtesy of Oliver Cornell. So basically, just what this says is they would assume it was more white than, or often assume it was more white than what it was. Also, different folks, and I don't think this isn't mentioned as much in our text, but folks tend to recognize other people of their own nationality more so than they do people that are, of other nationalities. And not quite sure why that is, but it is. So problem solving strategies, an algorithm is, a methodical or a logical rule that, helps procedure that guarantees a solution to a problem. Okay, and you may have heard too about, a lot of the different websites, some of the dating websites, they also operate on a algorithm. Sometimes these algorithms are better than others, but there's a different example. Okay, a heuristic is a simpler strategy that is usually speedier than an algorithm, but it also has a tendency to have more error involved. Okay, so insight, okay, we tend to think that insight will give our own instinct or insight maybe more credit than what it should have. It is not a strategy based on solution, but rather a sudden flash of inspiration that involves the problem. So we may think about something for a while, or sometimes we may just glean some insight rather quickly without having given it much thought. So it's not really a strategy-based solution, but and some folks are probably better at this than others. Okay, so problem solving obstacles, we have confirm bias, which, confirm bias. What is a bias? A bias is a prejudice, right? predisposes us to verify rather than to challenge our hypothesis. So that's something to keep in mind too. Fixation, such as a mental set, may prevent us from taking the fresh approach, which could lead to a solution. So if we get too focused on thinking that that we've got to fix something, then it may keep us from thinking or looking at it in fresh ways that might be more prone to solving the problem. A mental set is the tendency to approach a problem with previously successful mindset. So, and an example of that would be the prior one that we just mentioned, was this fixation. So, can be good and bad. So aha moment, or sometimes people will refer this to a light bulb moment. Okay, so it's a burst of an idea, you could say, and it's showing here how it resonates there in that yellow spot, and it's in that temporal lobe, and that is accompanied by insight or aha or light bulb moment. The red dots, they show placement of the EEG, the electrodes where they were measuring and coming up with the photo here to show us. The light gray lines show patterns of brain activity during the insight or the aha moment. Forming good and bad decisions, judgments, and what I am attempting to do here is, okay, we're going to leave that there, and I'm gonna bounce around a moment here. Okay, still getting used to the book and the way they put things a bit differently. So intuition, that's an effortless, immediate, auto feeling, or just conscious reasoning is just there. Okay, representativeness, heredity, is examining the likelihood of an event, terms of how well they seem to represent or match. And that again can be those particular prototypes coming back from that previous slide. It may lead us to ignore other relevant information, which is not a good thing. So availability heresy is on 330, and it's estimating the likelihood of events based on their availability in memory. Okay, and these events, may not always be a common event, but they're very triggering. Okay, and fear, there's a lot of fear factor involved here. And so say, like, if you look at 330, it's going to talk about, and I believe that might be in our next slide, and it is overconfidence. This is, our decisions and judgments that are affected by overconfidence, belief, or perseverance. We want to survive, so we want to persevere, and it causes us to frame things differently. And again, that's back to that, can be to that fear, and it can happen very much with our political views as well. And the stock market gets influenced by that as well. And fear factor is going to be more on the page 330. And it helps cause us the way that we frame things. And like an example, and I'm trying to see if this is going to talk about this. Okay. Frozen in a habit. Okay, so we get locked into our thoughts and our thinking, and that may not always be the best way to do it. Thinking critically about the fear factor. So once you look at page 331, and 9.4 is the factors exaggerated our fear of unlikely events. Okay, so and basically it's giving you statistics, and I'm not going to go into all those numbers, but the takeaway is many more people, they fear flying than they do driving, right? Okay, and the statistics basically say is that people should be a lot more fearful from automobiles than they should be from flying, because fewer people die or are injured in flight than they are in automobiles. Okay, people fear public speaking, and I'm also a speech teacher. So a lot of times they say people fear that more than they do death, their own death. So it's just interesting how we have this hierarchy of how we fear things, and they may not be based in anything that's super factual. So that's something to keep in mind. And why is it that we fear the wrong things? Okay, so number one, still again on 9.4 on 331, the fear, what our ancestry history was preparing us to fear. Okay, snakes, lizards, spiders now kill a tiny fraction of people, but our ancestors were taught to fear them because they killed a lot more people back when. So we are also kind of are predisposed to kind of have those fears for instinctual survival, because they were poisonous. Okay. And one of the things that we fear because it's very vivid, are shark attacks. Now, the likelihood of that is very unlikely, but people aren't as afraid of heart disease, and it kills 800,000 Americans per year, and a shark attack kills 1 American per year. So I wouldn't want to be that 1 American, and I wouldn't want to be one of that 800. 1,000 Americans, but I'll take my chance with the shark because the odds are greater. Okay, and also remember and fear disasters. People fear these because we see the photos, and we see things on the TV, and there's actually, it's not in our book, but there's actually a coined phrase for this. We talk about pornography, and they actually have a term for this, disaster pornography, and it's what causes people to want to see, all of this devastation, and it causes people not to be able to look away from it, and it sits, in the receptor sites of the brain, and it can, cause, a panic or a fear, sometimes just seeing the images. Okay, so we fear to do less with less traumatic and ongoing threats. Okay, so say like in this diagram again, it shows children getting hold of a rifle, or not of a rifle, of a hand pistol, and 92 Americans are killed in shootings. Okay, and worldwide, 500,000 children die every year from diarrhea, with tragic little notice. But it's because it's not been thought of as horrible as gun violence. So they tend to downplay that or upplay the other, depending on how you would categorize that, how you think about it. Okay, so I'm going to skip over a few of our slides. Okay, thinking creatively, we're going to talk about that, and thinking creatively, part 1. Okay, and this is on 334, and we have 9.11, what is creativity and what does it foster? So it's the ability to produce ideas that are both novel and valuable ideas. Okay, and then what it is going to very much spark imagination, and it's gonna have you think in a different way, and it's supported by aptitude, or our ability to learn, also our ability to scaffold, build upon what we've already previously learned. Your intelligence, and we'll talk about those. We have different tests that we do to measure intelligence, and there's also the idea out there that it's not easy to measure intelligence because there's different kinds of intelligence, and people from different areas, these intelligence tests may not be geared toward everyone. So some people are left out in this and being able to get a true measure of their intelligence. So thinking creatively, this is the second part. Divergent thinking, this expands the number of possible problem solutions. Creative thinking, that diverges in different directions, so gets you thinking in different ways. Convergent thinking, it kind of narrows the available problem solution to determine the single best solution. And they're both very good. The divergent thinking is more like your brainstorming. And so sometimes you'll have group think, or they'll brainstorm to come up with an idea. And then what they're doing after they do this divergent thinking, they're coming more into the convergent thinking, and they're narrowing it to find what the best solution is for that particular problem. So it's very important to be able to do both of those. Okay. Robert Sternberg and colleagues produced 5 ingredients of creativity. So they boiled it down in these 5 ways: expertise, imaginative thinking skills, venturesome personality, intrinsic motivation. They got to want to be intrinsically or motivated from inside. And creative environment. A creative environment is always very helpful. Okay, so we have comparing cognitive processes and strategies. So I'm not going to name off each one, but this is a great chart here, and you may even see a test question coming off of this. Hint, hint. Algorithm, it talks about the descriptive, the powers, the perils. Okay, insight, confirmed biases, fixation, all the way down to creativity. So make sure you're looking over that chart. Okay, do other species share our cognitive skills? Researchers make inferences about other species' consciousness and intelligence based on their behavior. So other animals use concepts, numbers, tools. They do transmit learning from one generation to the next. Okay, they show insight, self-awareness, altruism, and cooperative and cooperation and grief. So a lot of things that maybe man has considered to be more of a human qualities, but they are also found in the animal kingdoms. Okay, so if you look at, let's see which one, 338, you'll see a chimpanzee on A, and what he does every morning is he likes to collect stones, which later in the day he uses as ammunition to pelt the visitors. Isn't that nice? But we don't know, some of those visitors may have been mean to him in the past. Okay, and when we look here, the crow here, he learned quickly to raise the water level in the tube by floating and nabbed a floating worm, by putting stones in the water. So he knew that if he put stones in this container, it would make the water rise, and he'd be able to get the worm. And then so this shows them using tools. So of course, and that would be the behavior that we would be looking at there. And that's more of what we just saw. They had insight, and they do pass down from the next to the next generation, a lot of this insight. So and another thing, especially, and I want to see if I can find that in here, especially we see a lot of this Elephants are very good at remembering. We've all heard that. And they are very cooperative, and they have a lot of empathy for their young, and for you know, for their it's usually a group of females that are together, and they have a sisterhood, and there's a lot of feeling and emotion there, and you'll see that they grieve very strongly when someone dies, and they all come together to take care of their young. And this is true of many other animals as well. Especially, we notice this a lot with with mammals. So we would be remiss to think that animals don't have feelings and thoughts and empathy, and that they don't help each other, because they very much do. Language and thought, it involves our spoken, written, or signed words, and the way we communicate them to communicate meaning. So, and this will change from one generation to the next. And what it does is it connects humans. So it's very important that the language. Okay, that just kind of goes into that language diversity. There are about 6,000 plus languages worldwide, structured very differently. And Chomsky argued that all languages share basic elements called universal grammar. Okay, so he also theorized that humans are born with predisposition to learn grammar rules, not a built-in specific language. Okay, because he believed that the grammar was universal, and that would make sense in a lot of ways, because our needs, or if you look at, I'm not sure if that is. I'm not sure if that's this chapter. It's one of our chapters. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have basic needs all the way graduating up to self-actualization. We have a need for food, shelter, love, connectedness, and if we're really lucky, we get to self-actualize. But I'm not sure how many of us ever really get to that stage. But language, that starts with the babbling and the cooing with our infants. At about 4 months, they start. One word stage, that's about age 1 to 2, and it's mostly, single words, and they'll have quite a few of those. 2-word stages, that begins at about 2, and the child speaks mostly in 2-word statements. And then telegraph speech is when they start using nouns and verbs, and we get all excited to hear our little ones first start. So that'll show how we learn language. Receptive language, infants' ability to understand what is said to them begins at about 4 months, and food is a good reinforcer there. And then at about 10 months, they start to produce it. And then that just kind of shows how they do it. And then we're just going to kind of go down through here a little bit. How do we use or how do we learn grammar? So we have these critical periods, and you can find that on 347 of your textbook. Childhood is a critical period for mastering certain aspects of language. People who learn a second language as adults usually speak it with an accent of their first native language. But interestingly enough, is if they learn several languages when they're younger, they don't speak with accents. So that's pretty interesting to me. And they scaffold and build those language rules and don't seem to get too distracted. I knew someone who had taught their child, she was a language instructor, and her child from a very young age, started learning 3 different languages, and she did very well with all of those languages and didn't seem to confuse her, which I would have thought would have confused me terribly. So it's very interesting how placid our brains are the younger that we are, and we're able to really get more in during those critical periods. So new language learning gets harder as we age, and that's just more of basically what I was talking about. Deafness and language development. Children born to hearing non-deaf parents typically do not experience language during their early years. Native deaf children who learn signing after age 9 do not learn sign language. They master basic words or become as fluent as native signers. Late learners show less less right hemisphere brain activity in areas related to sign reading. Now, I did some study on deafness and signing, and it is truly incredible, and it is its own beautiful language. It's very interesting. It's its own culture, and they just have great deal to teach us, and it's they don't see themselves. This is what I really loved about it. They don't actually see themselves as disabled, especially if they were born without that. They have, conditioned themselves where they don't feel like they're at a disadvantage or that it's a disability. It's more what society puts on them, but they don't feel that they are disabled. So I really love that, being a counselor and counseling people. So let's see. And so they talk about, having an implant or not. More than 90% of all deaf children are born to hearing parents who often seek implants for their children. Deaf culture advocates they object to this intervention, and that's part of the reason why they would, because it's not a disability for them. The National Association of the Deaf argues that deafness isn't a disability because native signers are not linguistically disabled. They have language. So it's just a different language, and hearing folks need to be aware of that and be more culturally diverse and not be seeing it as a disability, because they do not. Okay, so the brain and language. Damage to any one of the several areas of the brain's cortex can impair language. So today's neuroscience has confirmed that brain activity in that bronchial and the Wernicke's areas during language processing. And in processing language, the brain operates by dividing its mental functions, and it puts it into a smaller task. Okay, so this is interesting. Okay, so an impairment of language usually caused by the left hemisphere damage is either to the bronchius area, which impairs speech, or the Wernicke's area, which is impaired understanding. So that's aphasia. And the bronchus area controls language expression in an area of this frontal lobe, usually in the left hemisphere, that directs the muscle movement involved in speech. Okay, so and then finally here we have this area controls language reception and the brain area involved in language comprehension and expression. And this is usually in the left temporal lobe. So this will show you how the activity when hearing and speaking words. So if you look at A, Okay, that's speaking, and B is hearing, and how that lights up. So do other species have languages? They have language? Of course they do. Monkeys, they sound different. They alarm for different predators. Chimpanzees, have been taught sign language, and can have, many, different signs that they use. Critics note that 8 vocabulary and sentences are simple. Vocabulary is gained with great difficulty. Okay, but it is obtainable, and there are some that are better at it than others. So most psychologists agree that humans alone possess language. Okay, and it all, I'm going to say it all very much depends on how we define it too. Okay. So Worf's linguistic determinism hypothesis. Okay, so language determines basic ideas. Evidence from bilingual speakers suggests that people think differently in different languages. Okay. Bilingual parents often switch languages to express emotions, and normally they're going to default to that first language they learned, especially if they acquired more of those languages later, where they actually have a what am I trying to say? Where they have anyway, what I'm trying to say is when they acquire those languages later in life, that first language, you're going to still hear an accent. There I go. Okay, so and the earlier that language is learned, that second or that third language, the less likely they are to have an accent. And what I will say with this logistic determinism hypothesis here, I will say that most of my people that I know that are Spanish speaking, and that is their first language, they say that when they hear English, they are deciphering it into Spanish and then bringing it back around. When they're thinking about it, they are thinking of it in Spanish. When they're hearing English, they're thinking of it in Spanish, and if they're reading it, they're having to turn it around and bring it back. So they're doing quite a lot there with their language, and I think that is pretty incredible. Words influence but do not determine thinking. Okay, so that's interesting. Thinking about colors. Colors are seen in the same way, but native language is used to classify them and remember them. Perceived differences expand as different names are assigned. And that's pretty interesting, looking at this, this here, and looking at A and B, and how it's perceived differences there in those colors. Okay, so language and thought. Expanding language expands the ability to think. Okay, so because it has you thinking about new and different ideas, and if you're thinking in several different languages, of course that's going to open you up in new ways. Bilingual speakers are executive control over language, and that's a bilingual advantage. To inhibit attention to irrelevant information, to irrelevant information. Okay, so that can happen too sometimes. Okay, relevant and irrelevant. Okay, language connects the past and the future, and language is evolving. There's a reason that our dictionaries change. They change and they add new words, right? Okay, thinking in images. After learning a skill, watching the activity activates the brain's internal stimulation of it. So that's pretty interesting. So that after we learn that skill, Watching the activity activates the brain's internal stimulation. So, and then what that does too is it causes us maybe to think about that in a new and different way, or we start to make connections. Again, that scaffolding with other ideas or other images. Okay, mental rehearsal can aid in academic goal success, process stimulation. Okay, and and I'll always say this too with my speech students, that mental rehearsal and even physical rehearsal, that aids very much in that goal of becoming a better speaker. Also test, it may not be the most fun to do, but going back over the information, making flashcards, doing all of these kind of things, and mentally rehearsing our information helps us to remember it. Okay, and that is going to conclude our chapter 9, thinking and language.